It's a story that defies every instinct a sailor develops over decades on the water. What the Coast Guard discovered when they pulled the wreckage of the 43-foot Catalina from the depths of the Pacific would rewrite everything the maritime community thought they knew about modern sailboat construction. This isn't just another tale of bad weather or human error. This is a mystery that haunted marine investigators for months and continues to send chills down the spines of experienced sailors today. In this story, we're going to dive deep into the chilling details of how a boat that passed every inspection, survived countless storms, and was maintained with obsessive care became a death trap in calm seas. We'll examine the forensic evidence piece by piece, analyze the final desperate radio transmissions, and reveal the hidden flaw that turned a dream voyage into a nightmare that could happen to any sailor who trusts their life to fiberglass and steel. This is a lesson that every mariner needs to understand, because what happened to David and Sarah Mitchell on that crystal-clear morning in September could happen to anyone who believes that experience, preparation, and quality equipment are enough to keep the ocean at bay. Sometimes, the deadliest enemy isn't the one you can see coming. David Mitchell had salt water running through his veins long before he ever set foot on his own boat. At 54, the former aerospace engineer from San Diego had been sailing since he was 12 years old, when his grandfather first taught him to read the wind on a small dinghy in Mission Bay. His wife, Sarah, 48, was equally passionate about the sea, though she came to sailing later in life. A former emergency room nurse with nerves of steel and hands that never trembled in a crisis, she had embraced the sailing life with the same methodical precision she brought to trauma medicine. For 15 years, their dream had been taped to the refrigerator in their modest ranch home in Escondido, a weathered magazine clipping showing a sleek sailboat cutting through turquoise waters somewhere in the South Pacific. The headline read, "Paradise Found, Living the Cruising Dream." But for David and Sarah, it represented something deeper than vacation fantasies. It was their vision of freedom, their escape from the suburban treadmill that had consumed their 40s, their chance to live deliberately before time ran out. The path to that dream had required enormous sacrifice. David took on consulting work that kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every month, banking every extra dollar, while Sarah picked up night shifts at the hospital. They drove their 15-year-old Honda until the transmission gave out, then bought another used car with cash. Vacations became weekend camping trips to state parks. Restaurant meals became rare treats reserved for anniversaries. Sarah's sister called them obsessed, but David and Sarah called it focused. Their friends thought they were crazy when they bought the 1987 Catalina 42 for $68,000, nearly their entire savings, from a broker in Newport Beach. The boat was solid, the broker assured them, with a proven track record and all the upgrades a serious cruising couple could want. But David wasn't the type to take anyone's word for anything that would carry his wife's life in its hull. Over the next 2 years, David transformed their garage into a marine workshop that would have impressed any professional rigger. He installed new through-hull fittings, upgraded all the electrical systems, and replaced every piece of standing rigging down to the smallest shackle. Sarah learned to operate the ham radio, studied celestial navigation, and earned her STCW Basic Safety Training Certificate. Together, they attended every sailing seminar offered within a 200-mile radius, accumulated enough safety equipment to stock a Coast Guard station, and practiced emergency procedures until they could execute a man-overboard recovery in their sleep. The boat they finally launched wasn't just seaworthy, it was a floating fortress of redundant systems and backup plans. Dual GPS units, twin diesel engines, 3 different methods of emergency communication, enough spare parts to rebuild half the boat, and water and food supplies calculated for twice their intended voyage duration. David's engineering background showed in every detail, from the custom-fabricated storm shutters to the carefully balanced weight distribution that kept the boat stable in any sea state. Overkill is underkill when your life depends on it, David would tell anyone who questioned their exhaustive preparations. Sarah, with her medical background, insisted on trauma supplies that could handle everything from seasickness to compound fractures. They weren't just preparing for a sailing trip, they were preparing for survival in the most remote corners of the planet. Their first major voyage validated every hour of preparation. The passage from San Diego to Hawaii took them 13 days through conditions that ranged from glassy calm to 30-knot winds with 12-foot seas. The boat performed flawlessly, cutting through the Pacific swells with the steady rhythm that only a properly balanced hull can achieve. David's navigation was spot on. Sarah's watchkeeping was disciplined and alert, and their equipment functioned exactly as designed. The Hawaii cruise that followed was everything they had imagined during those long years of sacrifice and preparation. They anchored in pristine bays, where the only sounds were trade winds in the rigging and waves lapping against the hull. They snorkeled over coral reefs that looked like underwater gardens, caught mahi-mahi that they grilled on their stern-mounted barbecue, and watched sunsets that painted the sky in colors that no photograph could capture. Other cruisers they met in harbors from Hilo to Hanalei praised their boat and their seamanship, often asking for advice on equipment choices and passage planning. After 6 months in Hawaiian waters, they felt ready for the next phase of their dream, Tahiti. The passage would be their longest yet, nearly 2,400 nautical miles of open ocean to the Marquesas Islands, then another 1,000 miles to the Society Islands. It was a route traveled by thousands of sailors before them, well documented and thoroughly understood by the cruising community. Their departure from Hilo on September 15th was textbook perfect. Light easterly trades, calm seas, and a weather window that promised at least a week of stable conditions. David filed their float plan with the Coast Guard, checked in with the Pacific Maritime Mobile Net, and set a course that would take them south-southwest toward the equator, where they would pick up the reliable trade winds that would carry them to French Polynesia. For the first 4 days, the passage proceeded exactly as planned. They logged consistent daily runs between 150 and 180 nautical miles, sailing comfortably under a full main and Genoa in 15-knot winds. Sarah's detailed log entries recorded their position, weather conditions, boat speed, and course at 4-hour intervals. Her nursing background showed in the meticulous attention to detail. Even small maintenance tasks like checking bilge pumps and inspecting rigging were documented with clinical precision. David's entries were equally thorough, but focused on the technical aspects of their passage. He recorded engine hours, battery voltage, water consumption, and fuel usage with the systematic approach of an engineer. His weather observations included barometric pressure readings, wind direction changes, and sea state descriptions that would have satisfied any meteorologist. Both of them noted how well the boat was handling the conditions, with consistent references to smooth sailing and comfortable motion. On September 19th, their 5th day out, Sarah wrote in the log, "Another perfect day in paradise. Steady 15-knot trades from the northeast, seas 4 to 6 feet, boat speed averaging 7.2 knots. David adjusted the self-steering vane this morning, and we're tracking beautifully on 195 degrees magnetic. Made fresh bread in the pressure cooker. Tastes like heaven after 4 days of crackers. This is what we dreamed about for all those years." David's entry that evening was equally optimistic. 1,247 nautical miles to go to Hiva-Oa. At this pace, we'll make landfall in exactly 8 days. Boat systems all functioning normally. Barometer holding steady at 30-15 inches. Small tear in the Genoa foot that Sarah patched perfectly. Her sailmaking class was worth every penny. We're living the dream. But dreams can become nightmares with shocking suddenness when you're 1,000 miles from the nearest land. The morning of September 20th dawned clear and bright, with the same steady trade winds that had carried them south for nearly a week. Sarah was on watch from 0600 to 1,000 hours, a routine they had maintained since leaving Hawaii. The autopilot was steering, the sails were perfectly trimmed, and their speed through the water held steady at just over 7 knots. David was below, catching up on sleep after his night watch, when Sarah noticed something that would have been invisible to a less experienced sailor. The sound of water moving along the hull had changed, just slightly, but Sarah's trained ear detected a subtle shift in the rhythm. Instead of the steady whoosh of water flowing cleanly past the hull, there was now an intermittent gurgling sound, almost like a drain that wasn't quite clearing properly. She checked their speed and course, both unchanged. She looked over the side at the water flowing past. It appeared normal, but the sound persisted, and Sarah had learned to trust her instincts. She went below and checked the bilge, bone dry, as it had been every day of their voyage. The bilge pumps showed no recent activity. All through hull fittings were secure and showed no signs of leakage. The engine compartment was clean and dry, but that sound continued. barely audible above the normal noises of a boat under sail, but definitely present. When David relieved her at 1,000 hours, Sarah mentioned the sound. David listened carefully, his engineer's ear trained to detect mechanical anomalies. He agreed that something was different, but like Sarah, he could find no obvious source. They went through their routine inspection checklist together. Every through-hull fitting, every seacock, every potential source of water intrusion. Everything appeared normal. Probably just the way the water's flowing around the hull in these particular sea conditions, David concluded. The wave angle might be slightly different today. It was a reasonable explanation from an experienced sailor, and Sarah accepted it. Neither of them could have imagined that they were listening to the sound of their boat slowly dying beneath their feet. The change in the boat's motion began so gradually that they almost didn't notice it at first. The steady, predictable rhythm of a well-balanced sailboat moving through regular trade-wind seas began to develop subtle irregularities. Instead of the metronome-like pattern they had grown accustomed to, there were occasional moments when the boat seemed to hesitate at the top of a wave or settle slightly deeper into a trough than expected. David first noticed it during his afternoon watch when he was hand-steering while Sarah adjusted the self-steering vane. The helm felt slightly different in his hands, not dramatically, but with the subtle change that an experienced sailor recognizes when something shifts in the boat's trim or balance. He called Sarah's attention to it, and together they tried to identify the cause. They checked the sail trim. Perfect. They verified their course and speed, both unchanged from the morning. They inspected the self-steering vane mechanism, functioning normally. The wind strength and direction were consistent with earlier in the day, yet the boat's motion continued to feel subtly wrong, like a car with a tire that's losing air so slowly you can't quite identify the problem. By evening, the change was more pronounced. The boat was definitely settling deeper into the waves, and there was a sluggish quality to her response that hadn't been there in the morning. David went through every system on the boat with the methodical approach that had served him well in his engineering career. Battery voltage normal, engine oil and coolant levels normal, fuel consumption unchanged, water tank levels exactly where they should be. The boat's waterline appeared normal from deck level. But when David opened the engine compartment access panel for the third time that day, he found something that made his blood run cold. The automatic bilge pump had cycled on and off twice since his last check 4 hours earlier, something it had never done in calm seas during their entire voyage. The bilge was dry when he checked, but the pump activity indicated that water was entering the boat faster than normal. Sarah joined him in the cramped engine space, her medical training helping her compartmentalize the rising anxiety while they searched for the source of the intrusion. They checked every through-hull fitting with flashlights, looking for the slightest sign of leakage. They examined every seacock, every hose clamp, every potential entry point for water. The systematic search revealed nothing obvious, but the bilge pump continued to cycle periodically, removing small amounts of water that were entering the boat from an invisible source. Could be the propeller shaft packing gland, David suggested, though he had inspected and adjusted it just 3 months earlier. They examined the shaft, where it passed through the hull. The packing was snug and showed no signs of excessive leakage. The rudder post packing was equally tight. Every through-hull fitting was secure and properly sealed. Yet water continued to enter their boat at a rate that was slowly but steadily increasing. As darkness fell on their 6th night at sea, David made the decision to alter course toward the nearest land, still over 800 miles away, and begin preparing their emergency communications. It wasn't panic, but the precautionary mindset that had served them well throughout their sailing careers. They were experienced enough to know that small problems at sea had a tendency to become large problems very quickly. Sarah plotted their position and calculated that the closest refuge was Hilo, Hawaii, the port they had left 6 days earlier. At their current speed, even if they turned around immediately, it would take them at least 5 days to reach safety. The alternative was to continue toward French Polynesia, which was still over 1,000 miles to the south. Neither option was comforting when your boat was taking on water from an unknown source. David tried to raise the U.S. Coast Guard on their marine radio to report their situation and position, but they were too far from Hawaii to make contact on VHF. Their single sideband radio could reach maritime mobile nets, but not until the evening propagation window opened in several hours. For now, they were alone with their slowly sinking boat and their growing concern. The water intrusion rate continued to increase throughout the night. By dawn, on September 21st, the bilge pump was cycling every 20 minutes, removing approximately 2 gallons of water each time. David calculated that water was entering their boat at roughly 6 gallons per hour. Not immediately catastrophic, but definitely unsustainable over the long term. More troubling was their continued inability to locate the source of the leak. Every logical entry point had been checked and rechecked. Every through-hull fitting, every seacock, every potential weak point in their hull was secure and properly sealed. Yet water continued to pour into their boat at a steadily increasing rate. The boat's motion had also deteriorated noticeably. The sluggish response that had begun the previous morning was now pronounced enough to affect their sailing performance. The bow was riding lower in the water, creating more drag and reducing their speed. The smooth, predictable motion they had enjoyed for nearly a week was replaced by a heavy, wallowing feel that made even simple tasks more difficult. David began to suspect that the problem was more serious than a simple leak. The amount of water entering the boat, combined with their inability to find its source, suggested structural damage below the waterline. But that possibility seemed impossible. They had hit nothing, encountered no severe weather, and the boat had shown no signs of structural problems during their careful pre-voyage inspection. As the sun climbed toward its zenith on their 7th day at sea, Sarah made a discovery that would finally explain the mystery and confirm their worst fears. While David was on deck adjusting their course toward Hawaii, Sarah decided to conduct one more systematic search of the hull interior. This time, instead of looking for obvious leaks, she used her medical training to look for subtle signs, slight discoloration, minor changes in surface texture, anything that might indicate a problem. In the forward cabin, behind a panel that housed the boat's electrical distribution system, she found it. A hairline crack in the hull, so fine it was barely visible, running vertically for approximately 18 inches along the starboard side, just above the waterline. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a minor gel coat crack, the kind of cosmetic damage that many older boats develop over time. But when Sarah examined it more closely with a powerful flashlight, she could see that the crack extended completely through the fiberglass laminate. It was so narrow that it was almost impossible to detect, but water was definitely seeping through it, not in a steady stream, but in a pattern that corresponded exactly to the boat's motion through the waves. When the boat rose on a wave, the crack was above the waterline and no water entered. When the boat settled into a trough, or when a wave washed over the bow, the crack dropped below the surface and allowed water to seep into the hull. The rate of intrusion varied with the sea conditions and the boat's motion, which explained why they had been unable to identify a consistent leak rate. David's face went pale when Sarah showed him the crack. As an engineer, he immediately understood the implications. This wasn't a leak that could be stopped with a pump or a patch. It was a structural failure that would only get worse as the boat's motion continued to flex the hull. Every wave, every change in course, every adjustment in sail trim was working the crack wider. More terrifying was the realization of why the crack had developed. The area where Sarah found it was directly adjacent to where David had installed their largest water tank during the boat's refit 2 years earlier. The tank held 80 gallons of fresh water and weighed over 600 pounds when full. David had secured it according to the manufacturer's specifications and marine engineering standards, but the constant stress of that weight, combined with the normal flexing of the hull in seawater, had gradually fatigued the fiberglass structure. The crack had probably been developing for months, starting as a stress concentration in the gel coat and slowly propagating through the laminate layers. In calm waters or at the dock, it would have been virtually invisible and caused no problems. But once they encountered the constant motion of ocean sailing, the crack began to open and close with each wave, allowing seawater to enter the hull with increasing frequency. David calculated that at their current rate of water intrusion, they had perhaps 24 hours before the situation became critical. The crack was continuing to widen with each wave cycle, and the water entering the boat was adding weight that made the boat ride lower, which in turn put the crack underwater more frequently. It was a downward spiral that would accelerate until either they reached safety or their bilge pumps could no longer keep up with the intrusion. Their single sideband radio finally raised a maritime mobile net operated by volunteer ham radio operators in California. David transmitted their position, described their emergency, and requested immediate assistance from the US Coast Guard. The response was professional but sobering. They were over 800 miles from the nearest Coast Guard station, well beyond the range of any rescue helicopter, and in an area where merchant ship traffic was minimal. The Coast Guard promised to issue an urgent marine assistance broadcast and begin coordinating with any vessels that might be in their area. But the duty officer was honest about the limitations they faced. At their current position, they were essentially on their own until they could get close enough to land for helicopter evacuation, or until a passing ship could alter course to assist them. David made the decision to continue toward Hawaii under power, using both their main diesel engine and their backup outboard motor to maximize their speed toward safety. Sarah began preparing their life raft and emergency supplies, while David worked to slow the water intrusion rate with every method available to him. The crack was too narrow and too inaccessible to repair with conventional patching materials, but David tried everything in their extensive repair kit. Underwater epoxy putty wouldn't adhere to the wet surface around the crack. Fiberglass cloth and resin couldn't be applied effectively to the concave interior surface. Emergency hull patches designed for larger holes wouldn't seal against the hair-fine crack that was allowing water to seep in. In desperation, David tried to relieve the structural stress that was keeping the crack open by redistributing weight within the boat. They moved the heavy water tank as far as possible from the affected area, shifted their spare anchor and chain to the opposite side of the boat, and even moved their personal belongings to alter the boat's balance. The measures helped slightly. The crack didn't open as far with each wave cycle, but water continued to enter the hull at an unsustainable rate. As afternoon faded toward evening on September 21st, their situation was deteriorating rapidly. The bilge pumps were now running almost continuously, removing more than 15 gallons of water per hour. The boat was riding noticeably lower in the water, which made the crack stay underwater for longer periods during each wave cycle. Their speed toward Hawaii had decreased as the extra weight made the boat more difficult to push through the water. Most alarming was the visible growth of the crack itself. What had started as a hairline fracture was now wide enough to insert a credit card, and its length had increased from 18 inches to nearly 2 feet. The structural failure was accelerating as the weight of the water in their bilge added stress to an already compromised hull. Sarah's medical training helped her maintain clinical detachment as she prepared their emergency equipment and reviewed their abandonment procedures. But David's engineering knowledge made him acutely aware of how little time they had left. The mathematics of structural failure were working against them with inexorable logic. Each hour that passed brought them closer to the point where their pumps could no longer keep up with the water intrusion, and once that threshold was crossed, they would have perhaps 30 minutes to abandon ship before the boat went down. Their last radio transmission was received by a maritime mobile net at 18:47 hours Pacific time. This is sailing vessel Dreamer, position 20 degrees 15 minutes north, 156 degrees 42 minutes west. We are taking on water through a hull crack and estimate we have 6 to 8 hours before abandonment. Proceeding toward Hawaii under power at maximum speed. Request immediate assistance from any vessel in our area. The volunteer radio operator in California acknowledged their transmission and confirmed that the Coast Guard had issued an urgent marine assistance broadcast. But as darkness fell over the Pacific, David and Sarah Mitchell were alone with their failing boat, still more than 700 miles from the nearest land. At 21:43 hours, the forward bilge pump failed. The constant duty cycle had burned out the motor, leaving only the main bilge pump in the engine compartment to handle the increasing water intrusion. David immediately deployed their backup hand-operated bilge pump, but the physical effort required to operate it meant that Sarah had to take turns with him, reducing their ability to maintain course and speed towards safety. By midnight, water was entering the boat faster than their remaining pump could remove it. The water level in the bilge began to rise steadily, adding weight that made the boat ride even lower and kept the crack underwater almost continuously. David estimated they had less than 2 hours before the water reached the engine air intake and killed their propulsion. At 01:47 hours on September 22nd, David keyed his radio microphone for the final time. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is sailing vessel Dreamer. We are abandoning ship due to uncontrolled flooding. Position 20 degrees 8 minutes north, 155 degrees 51 minutes west. 2 persons going to life raft. Mayday, sailing vessel Dreamer. Sarah had already inflated their 6-person life raft and loaded it with their emergency supplies, water, food, flares, and survival equipment for what might be a very long wait for rescue. David made one last check of their EPIRB emergency beacon to ensure it would activate when the boat went down, then joined his wife in the life raft they had hoped never to use. Dreamer sank 43 minutes later, taking with her 15 years of dreams and 2 years of meticulous preparation. The couple watched from their life raft as the boat they had trusted with their lives settled deeper into the Pacific swells, her mast light disappearing beneath the surface with a finality that no sailor ever forgets. The Coast Guard located David and Sarah Mitchell 16 hours later, approximately 50 miles from where their boat had gone down. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and deeply shaken, but alive. The rescue helicopter that lifted them from their life raft also recovered their EPIRB beacon, which had transmitted perfectly when Dreamer finally slipped beneath the waves. The subsequent Coast Guard investigation revealed the full scope of what had gone wrong. Marine surveyors who examined the life raft and emergency equipment confirmed that the Mitchells had done everything correctly. Their preparation was exemplary, their emergency procedures were executed flawlessly, and their survival gear functioned exactly as designed. The problem lay not in their seamanship or their preparation, but in a fundamental flaw that no amount of experience could have predicted or prevented. The investigation determined that the hull crack was the result of a manufacturing defect that had existed since the boat was built in 1987. The fiberglass laminate in that section of the hull contained a small void, an air bubble, that had been trapped during the original construction process. Over the course of 28 years, normal structural flexing had gradually weakened the laminate around the void until it finally failed under the additional stress of the heavy water tank installation. The defect was so subtle that it would have been invisible during any normal survey or inspection. Even a complete ultrasonic thickness survey of the hull would likely have missed it, since the void was less than an inch in diameter and located in an area where the hull thickness varied due to the interior molding. The crack only became visible after it had propagated completely through the laminate, at which point it was too late to repair. The investigation also revealed that similar failures had occurred in at least 6 other boats from the same production run, though in most cases the boats were close enough to shore that emergency repairs or immediate assistance had prevented total loss. The manufacturer had quietly issued a service bulletin recommending additional structural reinforcement in the affected area, but the bulletin was sent only to authorized dealers and was never widely distributed to boat owners. David and Sarah Mitchell had done everything right. They had purchased a well-regarded boat from a reputable manufacturer. They had maintained it meticulously, upgraded every system, and prepared for every conceivable emergency. They were experienced sailors who followed established safety procedures and maintained their equipment to professional standards. Yet their boat still sank beneath them because of a flaw that no one could have detected until it was too late. The story of Dreamer serves as a sobering reminder that the ocean recognizes no amount of preparation or experience as sufficient guarantee against the unexpected. The sea tests not just our seamanship and our equipment, but our acceptance of the fundamental truth that some risks cannot be eliminated, only managed. Sometimes, the deadliest flaws are the ones we never see coming. For every sailor who trusts their life to fiberglass and steel, the lesson is both humbling and essential. Respect the sea, not just for its visible power, but for its ability to find weaknesses we didn't know existed. Prepare for every emergency you can imagine, but remain humble enough to know that the ocean will always hold surprises we never imagined possible. The Mitchells returned to sailing 2 years later on a different boat, older but wiser about the invisible risks that lurk beneath the surface of even the most carefully planned voyage. They still dream of distant islands and trade wind passages, but they dream now with the knowledge that the sea keeps its own counsel about which boats will make it safely to harbor and which will not. In the end, that may be the most important lesson the ocean has to teach us, that respect and preparation are essential, but humility in the face of forces beyond our control is what keeps experienced sailors alive when the unexpected finds them far from shore.